You Satan! Satan!
It's okay.
My name is Kit, and you must subscribe to Geek Legion of Doom.
Directed by Vicky Jewson and starring Uma Thurman, we are talking Pretty Lethal. And this is a 2026 girl power action movie, so let's discuss. So this focuses on a troupe of ballerina dancers as they are preparing to go to a kind of tryout show or something like that in Budapest. And on the way, their flight gets rerouted. They end up having to take a bus. But then the bus breaks down, so they end up having to try and walk to the kind of the nearest hope of civilization. And they run across this hotel, which is in this kind of somewhat sort of run-down rural area. Initially, they are relieved, but they soon find out that this hotel is actually home to a variety of Eastern European gangsters, all of whom are a little dangerous. The hotel is headed up by Uma Thurman's character, who herself was once a ballerina, and things happen, things escalate, and now these bunch of female ballerinas have to try and escape with their lives. What will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So let's discuss what do you think works in this movie's favour. Okay, so you're going to have to decide whether you kind of are wanting to watch a film which is clearly sort of like a girl power type fantasy, because if you're not, this one straight away is not going to be for you. Let me just say that. If you can kind of, it doesn't bother you, you can get past that, there is a fun movie here. Yes, it's silly. I don't think it's meant to be taken too seriously. It's got some fun ideas, and let's discuss in a little more detail. So, the crux of the idea here is that we have a group of ballerinas using their skills as ballerinas to outwit and outfight criminals, gangsters, that sort of thing. Now, obviously you have to have some degree of suspension of disbelief, but, you know, to be a ballerina is to be very fit and obviously very kind of flexible. And what they are using is, for example, ballerina like kicks and things like this and high moves to be able to outmaneuver a lot of these kind of criminals. So, you know, you have to have a lot of core strength. I actually used to date someone who was a ballerina once upon a time, and very, very fit, but more athletic rather than kind of like, obviously, strength in that traditional sense. But nonetheless, I can see the argument for it, if that makes sense. Obviously, it's, you know, again, suspension of disbelief, but I kind of get the idea. And obviously what these girls end up doing, they end up getting some like box cutter type blades and putting them in there, and there's kind of the tips of their sort of ballerina shoes, and then up twiddling around and kind of being able to kind of like cut up people. So again, there's some kind of like fun, cheesy B movies, idea of kind of like fights here. Now, again, if you're familiar with this channel, you know, a silly B movie concept I enjoy, you know. So again, I think the whole sort of girl boss sort of argument, you know, again, I'm not going to try and convince you one way or the other. That's going to be up to you. But I think, okay, yes, the idea is a little far-fetched, but I kind of quite like it in its sort of cheesy, you know, kind of like silly movie action film idea. I mean, obviously you've had the whole John Wick ballerina thing now, so it's not the first time ballerinas have been used as kind of like, you know, substitute action heroes. But again, it's kind of, I can understand the reasons why, because obviously these people are, you know, very flexible, they're very fit, they can, you know, kick quite high. They're actually using dance moves to, you know, step in for kind of like martial arts and things. And they work as a team, they work as a group, and often when they are fighting larger, you know, heavier, stronger criminals, they use en masse, they kind of like attack as a group. So yeah, still it's a sense of disbelief, but I still think it's a fun concept, and if you can kind of get over it, you can kind of enjoy just the kind of like this silly schlocky idea of it, and I kind of did. I kind of quite like this kind of like this fun sort of concept. I also kind of quite enjoyed this kind of Eastern European sort of style antagonists. I mean, it will kind of remind you of like Hostel and things like that. That's where my mind went. You're kind of going like these kind of back alley Eastern European types who are, you know, have no regard for kind of human life and law and things like that, and very, very kind of dangerous and unpredictable and stuff like that. And it has this genuine sort of seediness to it. I think the movie's actually very well cast here. You know, Uma Thurman is obviously, I mean, she's playing like a Hungarian kind of criminal, really, but and clearly she's not Hungarian. But all of the casting here, these people who are playing these kind of you know, gangsters and stuff, they sort of look the part. I quite appreciate. They all kind of got tattoos and all of the rest of it. They have a kind of an Eastern European vibe, a lot of mullets and things like this, and I kind of quite liked it. I thought they were actually well cast. I thought the kind of the hair and makeup and the costume design and everything was quite fun. And then just the kind of the absurdity of, I mean, our ballerinas actually end up having to wear their ballerina outfits because their regular clothes are all like wet, and the only dry clothes that they've got is their ballerina stage kind of costumes and stuff. So that's why they are wearing, and that's why you have a group of kind of like ballerinas in their tutus going around and stuff like that. So there's kind of an in-story reason for it. So, but it has this kind of absurd sort of visual, but they try and incorporate it into the story. The movie is sort of slickly produced, and you know, it has a level of kind of polish and sheen to it. I mean, it looks like a streaming movie, which obviously it is, but you know, nonetheless, it still has that sort of somewhat of a decent kind of production value there. And obviously Uma Thurman turning up as our kind of bad guy, and obviously she's well known for like the Kill Bill films and stuff, even though she's not really involved necessarily directly in the action. She still makes for quite a sort of a decent head bad guy to a degree. And even within our bad guys, we have a little kind of story elements here about the kind of the internal politics between the kind of like this kind of criminal gang, and maybe it's not all copacetic between all of them and things like that. So the movie has a little bit of like detail in regards to some sort of character moments and things like that within the film that I quite like. And I also think the movie is relatively kind of well acted. Everyone here does a decent enough job. I mean, it's not exactly heavy lifting, but everyone here I think does you know, a fairly good job, and there's some good action sequences as well. So what doesn't work? So although I think the acting is, I don't think it's bad at all, the character work here is very broad. I mean, I think, as I say, our kind of criminal element is well cast, but everyone here sort of plays into somewhat of a stereotype. All our kind of criminals, you know, they're all sort of what you would expect to see from a film that has Eastern European bad guys. They're all very much kind of leaning into that. Our group of ballerinas, of course, there's the sort of like the internal struggles. You've got the kind of the rich bitch one. You've got the girl who's the scrappy one from a kind of a poorer household, and she ends up kind of like becoming the kind of like the leader because she's the most scrappy, because she's had to kind of like fight for everything and all that. So there's a little bit of broad characterization here where everyone is just a kind of a bit like, you know, yeah, okay, just like just go to the kind of the nearest kind of stereotype that you think you're going to be, and we'll go with that. So yeah, character work, not exactly deep, not badly acted, but there's not a lot to work through in any type of dramatic sense, if that makes it, you know, makes any sense. Again, I think the general premise and the concept of this won't be for everyone, and if you are a sort of person who likes more of a realistic action film, again, these are obviously women who are very sort of like slender and petite builds, realistically wouldn't have any hope in a fight against a much larger criminal, you know, guy who is clearly going to kind of like outpower them, despite them being, you know, more flexible and everything like that. So, you know, yeah, again, can you get over that suspension of sort of disbelief? And there are some elements here that I just thought were a little silly. there's a scene where we have this kind of big finale where we end up with this kind of like group fight, and I'm thinking, if this is a hotel full of criminals, barely any of them have guns on them, and if this, you know, if you're even trying to have any type of sense of realism, and this was a, you know, a hotel which catered to the criminal element, they're going to have weapons on them, and they will just stand there and shoot these women. There's also a lot of kind of like plot elements where we'll take, you know, there's a guy who's like dismembering the, you know, someone, and they'll do one at a time to give people a chance to escape. Cells aren't really guarded and things like this. So there's kind of like, you know, and why even when they captured these ballerinas, why aren't they just immediately killed? Again, so the plot can happen ultimately. So you've got to have that sort of cheesy B-movie sort of sensibility kind of going into this, because if you are expecting an action movie which actually dabbles in the kind of the real, then, you know, this is not going to be it. So, you know, what are you going to do? So, you know, it maybe could have also been a little bit more lent into the violence a little more, I think. I mean, as it stands at the moment, it's kind of like a chewing gum, bubble gum sort of style action film where it doesn't really have a huge amount of like impact. There's one, I think the first death that we see, I think is actually, you know, because it sort of comes out of nowhere. And I do think that was handled pretty well, but then after that you kind of feel like it's more of like just silliness, you know. So again, I think it could have had a little bit more impact, which it doesn't really. Overall though, you know, it's a fun throwaway action movie. Can you sort of like accept the premise, would be the first question. If you can, and you're not expecting too much, it's a fun movie, you know. I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10. It's nothing special, but I kind of still quite enjoyed it for what it was. Let me know your thoughts if you've seen it. Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.
Welcome, my Neon Legionaries. Subscribe to Geek Legion of Doom now.